Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Democrats complain that Mr. Musk is an unelected bureaucrat. Well, I'd remind them that every bureaucrat is unelected. That's why the elected president is solely vested with the executive powers of the federal government. There is no bureaucrat that's independent of the president. That would mean that they're independent of the people, which is the very definition of a tyranny. Mr. Musk is accountable to the president, who in turn has been accountable to the people. The threat that we face is unelected bureaucrats who are working contrary to the will of the people as expressed through the presidential election. It seems to me that the beating heart of a democracy is our freedom of speech. That's how a free society sorts truth from lies and right from wrong and wisdom from folly. Americans have always believed that the way to do that is put the two of them side by side and trust the American people to tell the difference, and they've done a good job of that in 250 years. It's clear to me that in the last 4 years, the Democrats attempted to install themselves, rather than the American people, as the arbiters of what is true and right and wise. And what we saw was the power of government focused on muzzling their opposition and preventing the democracy from working. I'm particularly concerned about the coordinated suppression of the story of the Hunter Biden laptop because of post-election polling in which respondents said that if they'd seen that information during the election, it would have changed their vote, and in numbers that would have changed the outcome of the presidential election. That's election interference on a historic scale and about as clear a threat to democracy as it gets. But I remember a story of a retiring law professor who said that for many years he'd begin his course on the First Amendment by telling the joke of an American and a Soviet talking about freedom of speech in their countries. The American said, well, we have the right to say whatever we want about our government officials. And the Soviet replied, well, so do we, except the officials don't let us lie about them. He said that always got a big laugh in his classrooms until the last few years. And that's what I find very shocking about what has occurred in our society. I agree with the Democrats that we need to be just as vigilant in defending speech we disagree with. That's absolutely true. It was something that they were unwilling to do themselves during the last 4 years that they held power. Now, Mr. Taibbi, you've talked about this before. I've often said we must never allow the left to become our teachers. But you saw this transition firsthand, and you've spoken out about the importance of freedom of speech on all sides. Would you care to elaborate?
Sorry, I'm a little, thank you for the question, Mr. Congressman. This sudden adopting of the free speech religion is a little jarring, where obviously you're very concerned about things that Elon Musk may be doing or Donald Trump may be doing. But where was that concern when White House officials were pressuring Twitter to remove New York Times reporter Alex Berenson, who was ultimately taken down for saying an absolutely true statement, which was that the vaccine does not prevent infection or transmission? That case is still going through the courts. Where was that concern when the New York Post was locked out of its own account for 2 weeks for an absolutely true story about Hunter Biden's laptop?
It seems to me two of the most consequential issues that affect the lives of every American are the debates over climate change and the debate over COVID and how to respond to it. And yet the government worked overtime to suppress contrary opinions. Mr. Schellenberger, you mentioned that one thing we need to do is defund the institutions that are suppressing speech, and I couldn't agree more. Let me ask you, what else should we be doing right now? What legislation should we be pursuing to enshrine the First Amendment freedoms that the left waged war against these years?
Well, thank you for asking, Congressman. I mean, I think it's really, we don't have accountability yet. We don't have the files. We don't know what really happened. We have some of the files of what's occurred, but just on the Hunter Biden laptop case, you had a sophisticated influence operation being operated by the FBI through the Aspen Institute to pre-bunk, which is code for brainwash journalists and the social media censors, in advance of the story coming out. I mean, that is next level kind of manipulation going on, illegal by the FBI. We don't have any of the files on that. But I think the most pressing threat right now is from Europe. The censorship industrial complex is sort of retreating into Europe. They want to, weaponize their Digital Services Act. I don't, as a taxpayer, as an American whose life and my family's life is on the line to protect Europe, I don't know what I'm doing if I'm trying to defend a continent that wants to suppress freedom of speech for their own people and for the entire planet.
Well, my time's expired, but I'd be very interested in the thoughts of all of our panelists on what additional actions the government can take. You're saying defund them and get to the bottom of it. I couldn't agree more. Then what? Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes